All right, good morning, everyone. It's always a little bit of pressure to give the last presentation before lunch because you got a bunch of hangry hackers going on, but bear with me and we'll get through this, all right? So my name is Chris Horner. I work for Rebic Security, which is a consultancy in Charlotte, and we focus on offensive security testing. So your pen testing, social engineering tests, vulnerability assessments, things of that nature. So today, we're going to talk about how to lose your credentials and gain a new domain admin. We're going to look at the problems of ransomware. We're going to take a look at how these groups operate. When data gets breached, we're going to see where it ends up on the internet. And then in the end, we're going to do a walkthrough of an actual pen test that we conducted. And that will actually show how a ransomware attack could proliferate through an organization. So when we talk with our clients, what we frequently hear is that ransomware and phishing are the two top concerns that they have. And these days, ransomware groups are highly organized criminal enterprises. Heavy emphasis on highly organized. They operate with their own rules. They have their own goals. They have people that fill specific roles within their organization. But what this allows is for their operation to grow like any other business would. So a lot of times the way that these ransomware groups operate is they have affiliates. And affiliates are the ones that go out and carry out the dirty work, while the ransomware group is providing the platform or the tools for them to carry out their attacks. The way that they profit is that if their affiliates are successful in extorting a ransom from a company, they give a kickback to the ransomware operator. But those kickbacks are highly in favor of the affiliates. Affiliates will keep 80 to 90% of the ransom collected. The ransomware group keeps anywhere from 10 to 20% typically. Other ransomware groups operate on a subscription model. But regardless, they enable people with moral flexibility to start their own little burgeoning criminal enterprises. And the only reason these groups exist is to chase the bag. And they do it because it's been highly profitable and highly successful for them. A recent study from Arctic Wolf showed that 83% of companies that are attacked actually end up paying the ransom. Ironically, they have extremely high customer service standards. So this is an example of Ransom Hub's terms of service. They expect their affiliates to operate in a certain way. For example, they do not allow attacks on Commonwealth of Independent States like Russia. They can't attack targets in Cuba, North Korea, or China. They do not allow attacks on nonprofit organizations. They do not allow attacks on hospitals, not because they're altruistic or that they really care, but because if you mess with the hospital and shut the place down, people start dying, law enforcement starts taking a lot bigger interest in your activity, and they try to avoid that as much as possible. They also stipulate no reattacks. If you pay a ransom and their affiliate comes back and hits you again, they will provide you the decryption key. If you pay the ransom and their affiliate does not provide the decryption key, they'll step in and take care of it. And they even have contact information on their website, how you can get a hold of them if you have a problem dealing with them or their affiliate. So they go to extraordinary lengths to make sure you walk away having had a good customer service experience when you deal with them. And a lot of legitimate companies could honestly learn from these groups on that front. This is a copy of a chat log from the ransomware group Akira. After a company had paid the ransom, they went back and told them, outlined exactly how they compromised their systems and what they need to do to close it up. It became the most expensive internal pen test of all time. So this slide is from BreachSense. It shows which industries are targeted the most. Construction and manufacturing lead the way. Construction sounds surprising until you remember they deal with a lot of confidential information. Who's really behind building projects? Not to mention, they have a lot of subcontractors. They have a lot of vendors that they deal with, which, as we've seen in the news lately, this ultimately increases the attack surface of an organization. And let's just be honest, a lot of times they are typically behind the curve when it comes to cybersecurity preparedness. So manufacturing too, think about all the intellectual property that's contained in a factory when it's building whatever it's building, not to mention the massive amounts of money that move through there. and it starts to make sense why these industries are so highly targeted. Then rounding out the top 5, you have education, finance, and IT. This is a snapshot of companies, victim companies, just from the last 12 months that have been victims of ransomware attacks. And if you look in the upper right corner, look how small that cursor is and how far down it goes. So that gives you an idea of the scale of this problem these days. And again, this is just from a 12-month period. As far as where these attacks take place, USA all the way. US wins by a nautical mile. Over 51% of attacks are right here on home soil. The rest of the globe divides out the rest of the pie. As far as who's carrying out these attacks, now this slide I have to put an asterisk on, and I'll explain why in a bit. So for 2024, Lockbit and RansomHub were the leaders in ransomware attacks. Those two organizations alone accounted for over 20% of all attacks, 1 in 5. And Chelan, down in the bottom right corner, was 3.3%. So as we all know, in the cybersecurity world, things move very quickly. And in the ransomware world, it's no exception. So we give different versions of this presentation to different groups. And so these statistics were compiled around the first quarter of this year. Thing is, by the time we compiled them and then started getting the presentation, it was already outdated. Just in the first few months of this year, Chelan has now moved to the very front of the line as the most prolific attacker. RansomHub has since been shut down, and Lockbit themselves was breached and their website was defaced. About a month ago, the Center for Internet Security published these statistics showing that in Q1 of this year, Chelan had moved from 3.3% market share up to 9%. And then by the end of Q2, they were up to, was it 24%? Yeah, 24% of all attacks. They are moving quickly, and they are extremely good at what they do. Now, there's a few different reasons for this, because when groups like RansomHub get shut down, the people that were working there, either with the operator group or the affiliates, move on to the next big thing. Currently, that would be Chelan. So one of the favorite tools of ransomware operators are infostealers. Usually these are delivered through social engineering attacks. It's delivered through email or getting somebody to click on a link that they shouldn't. And so what happens is their browser ends up getting infected. So these infostealers, we're all familiar with the autofill feature of a lot of browsers. It automatically fill in your name, address, phone, credit card information, usernames, passwords, etc. Well, guess what? If you get an infostealer on your system, it is siphoning everything out of those autofill things and transmitting it over to attackers. Some of them even steal session cookies, which attackers can attempt to replay. They don't even need your username and password to log into whatever service you were using them for. And these infostealers can be set to update in virtually real time as well. So as it collects new information, it gets siphoned right on out. But once this information is collected, then the credentials or whatever it was used are used to carry out further attacks. So on the left side of this slide, it shows this is an actual infostealer log, and you can see what kind of information it was collecting. Cookies, autofills, account tokens. This particular one also siphoned some files out of the computer too. And on the right side, I redacted a lot of it, but this is what it looks like from the attacker viewpoint. They get to username, password, in plain text, in the exact website that those credentials go to. So another problem these days is with our remote workforce. So sometimes people will use their personal device to log into corporate assets. And say their kid downloads the wrong Roblox mod and infects that system with an infostealer, and then that person goes and logs in to their company account. Oh, I just need to check my email or something. Well, guess what? Now those credentials have gotten out. And this is not a far-fetched scenario. So we might remember the Snowflake breach last year. What the indicators in that attack was that Jira creds were captured from a contractor's personal device that was infected with an infostealer. And MFA was not required, and in this case, was not enabled for their login. So what ended up happening was an attacker got a hold of those, got into the Snowflake environment, and breached a whole lot of data from their customers. And the fallout from that was enormous. Snowflake was presented with class action lawsuits from companies like AT&T, LendingTree, Santander, Advanced Auto, a dozen other companies who had their data compromised in that breach. Then those victim companies were then sued by their customers for losing control of all of that data. It's a gigantic mess, and it's still rolling through the court system today. Now, as far as this data, when it gets dumped and when it gets breached, a lot of times it's assumed it just goes to the dark web, and that's not always the case. There are actually websites on the clear web that deal in the sale of this breached data. 77 Store is an example of that. As you can see, they offer things like social security numbers, bank account, PayPal accounts. Again, anything that you would need to extort or steal from somebody. And according to Secure World, our personal information sells for very, very cheap. A basic package of personally identifiable information, name, address, SOC, goes for as little as $5. Want to throw a credit card in there? $20 to $120, depending on the account. Your online banking credentials, $35 to $65. Copies of your IDs, $500 to a few grand. But interestingly enough, one of the most expensive records is healthcare records. And that's surprising to some, but think about all the information you have to fill out when you go to a healthcare provider. Then, on top of that, while you can always get a new bank account number, you can get a new credit card number, you can even move and change your address, you can't change your health information once it's out there. So that information just is what it is. Those records typically go for an average of $1,000 each. Blackbed is another clear website that deals in the sale of this kind of data. On the left side, you can pick the kind of industry, the kind of information that you're looking for. In this case, we were looking at banks. And then there's another drop-down. You can even drill down to the exact bank whose information that you want to get. Add it to your shopping cart, check out, and there you have it. It operates like any other e-commerce storefront. They just deal in terrible things. So, when it comes to the dark web, our lawyers advise us we have to give this disclaimer. We don't recommend going there. If we're talking about the dark web in a situation like this, it's from an informational perspective only. It is a terrible place, and nobody should ever go there for any reason whatsoever. Everybody clear on that? All right. So here's how you get there. First, you have to download the Tor browser. Tor stands for the Onion Router. You can get it for all major desktops and Android. And once you boot it up, it looks like the internet we're all familiar with. It just happens to run a lot slower. What the main difference is that there is no Google for dark websites. You have to know how to find them. And again, from BreachSense, this shows what a dark web address looks like. They end in .onion. The middle of it is complete gibberish. You would never guess it. You would never accidentally come across it. So you have to know how to find those kind of sites. And then even if you go to one of those websites, they look like this. They look like they were created with all the latest and greatest technology from 1996. They just sell illegal things, drugs, roids, firearms, malware, whatever. But if you want to track what's going on in the ransomware world, there's an open source project called ransomlook.io. And they track the activity of these various groups. And the last time I updated the slide was about a month ago. And they were tracking 493 different groups across 137 forums and 200 and some odd, my eyes are old, Telegram channels. Telegram is the preferred encrypted program of choice for criminals and ransomware providers of all sorts. It's so notorious for illegal activity on this platform, the CEO was arrested last year in France under allegations they were doing little to combat criminal activity on the platform. But then you can drill down into the different groups. I use Cheelin here. As you can see from the bar graph, they've been very busy. If this slide were to scroll down, you can even see the companies that they've popped, as well as screenshots of what they do. We talked about people that provide specific services within ransomware groups. initial access brokers is one of these. The clue's in the name. What they do is they just sell the initial foothold onto a corporate network. They don't care about doing the ransom, doing the negotiating, or anything else. They just let it go. They just want to get their piece and move on. So an IBM study showed that attackers were in a network an average 206 days before ever launching an attack, which is 7 months. What in the world are they doing in there for 7 months? Well, if you're familiar with pen testing methodology, you've probably heard the word enumerate until your ears bleed. Enumerate, enumerate, enumerate. But that's important. It's the most important part because how can you analyze something you don't understand what's going on? So that's what they're doing in there. They're doing recon, they're setting up their persistent access, siphoning data out slowly sometimes so it blends in with normal traffic. Ransom Hub, when they were in existence, they had a countdown page on their website that showed which companies were being extorted and how much time they had left to pay the ransom before their information would get dumped. So funny story with that. Like I said, we do this presentation to different versions of it to different industries, and we were talking to banks and credit unions one time. One bank didn't show up that morning, and it's fine, things happen, right? So we decided it would be fun to pull this page up live during the presentation, and we saw that bank's name they were on Ransom Hub's page. They were actually in the middle of dealing with the ransomware attack. So, like Meta a few weeks ago, we learned never to do live demonstrations ever again. But to the point of attackers taking their time in the network, this is an actual chat log from an attack group that was targeting a Catholic charity. They had done their homework. They knew that the organization had been extorted in 2020 and had paid the ransom. They knew the revenue. They knew how much employee benefits and salaries cost. Want to know what else they knew? How much they were covered for in cyber insurance. They knew exactly what to ask for because they'd seen the policy. And negotiating becomes an awful lot easier when you know what the other side has to spend already. So, as far as how this attack can unwind through a network, this is where we do the pen test walkthrough. And most of these slides are going to be from an actual test that we did. So, we always start with OSINT research. We're trying to find valid usernames of a company. And so the way we do that, scrape things like LinkedIn, Zoom, info, stuff like that, just trying to get names. We take different versions of the name, different email address formats, first name dot last name, first initial, last name, whatever, and we run it against the Office 365 login portal because that portal is weak to username enumeration. If you find a valid username, it prompts you for a password. If it's an invalid username, you get an error. So once we have the email address format, we take our list of names, we use a tool called MSOL spray, and we spray our list in the correct format against the Office 365 login page. We combine that with a tool called FireProx. What that does is it rotates the IP address for every one of our requests, so it doesn't look like we're doing what we're doing from the same IP. But the end result is we have a list of valid usernames that we know are good for that company. We take that list of valid usernames and we run it against known data breach files, and we look for matches. In this case, we found one. This particular client, one of their employees, their credentials were in plain text in a dark web data breach file. And I swear to God this is true, and I wish it wasn't. The password, of course, was password1234. Yeah. So those credentials worked. We used them to log in, and it worked, but we ran into an MFA prompt. What people sometimes forget is that Microsoft has a number of different APIs to authenticate against, and sometimes they're not all set up correctly. So we used another tool called MFA Sweep. We used those valid credentials, figured out if we authenticated against the Graph API and the Service Management API, we could get through without the MFA prompt. And we were in. So once we got in there, we were on Azure, we dumped the entire username list, and we started a password spray attack. And of course, we started with the one that we knew worked, password1234. And this is an actual screenshot redacted from that test. We found 36 more accounts that were using that password. And then worse, you see in the red box, some of them have notes, some of the success notes say that MFA is in use. But if it doesn't have that line, there's no MFA on that account. So now we had even more accounts that we could use to try moving around the network without running into MFA. So we have weak password policy. We have password reuse, which is already off to a bad start. One of the sets of credentials got into their R&D SharePoint. So if we were an attacker, this is where we would siphon the intellectual property information. Another one popped open a remote desktop web instance. We figured out at the top there, if we typed in C://, we got to the top of the network drive, the very top of the C drive, and we could explore the rest of those folders. So now we started seeing all sorts of stuff that we're not supposed to see. Eventually, we found where they kept their backups. This is another thing that attackers do. So before they fully launch their attack, they'll either delete or encrypt the backups, but this is how they know where to go. And another reason they're sitting in there so long, they know those backups are going to become infected with their presence. So if a company is facing a ransomware attack, they don't have time to sit there and go back and figure out when it happened. So if they try to restore from a backup, guess what? It's still going to be, the access is still going to be there. So then we use another tool, NetExec, and we were looking for SMB read-write permissions on SMB shares, and using the credentials that we had captured from before. Found the pot of gold in the SQL database. One set of the credentials had read-write permissions, and because it turned out it was a SQL admin account, which I will remind you, the password was password1234. Want to know what else it doubled as? A domain admin account. Another big no-no. So game over. So we had the keys to the kingdom. We dumped the ntds.dit file, which has all the hash passwords for the company in it, took it offline, began cracking it. Because we're professionals, we don't look for just one path through the network. We want to find as many as possible as testing time allows. And we started our process completely over and just kept going. If you're following along closely, one thing you might have noticed, we didn't throw a single exploit. There were no 0 days. There was no wild coding involved. This was just a combo attack of weak passwords, misconfigurations, and overly permissions accounts, which is the holy trinity of problems that lead to network compromise. And a finer point on that, these are things a vulnerability scan alone will never pick up. Vulnerability scans have their place. You can be patched all day long, but we get your password and you got your permissions set wrong, it's still going to be game over. And that's how it works with those ransomware groups too. Then it's the final point. We are seeing a lot of clients that are implementing EDR systems, but what we're seeing is sometimes people treat these like silver bullets, and they're not. See, when we're doing our pen test, we're not trying to be quiet, we're not trying to be stealthy. We're time-bound, unlike a real attacker. So we're noisy, and we're trying to go through and get what we can. But what we find, we work with the IT team of our client, because we want to notate in our reports what alerts that they're seeing. So if this was an attack, how would they, a real live attack, how would they have fared against it? Would they have picked it up? Would they have stopped it? What we're seeing a lot of times is these systems still need fine-tuning. Alerts are not coming in at the right time. They're not auto-blocking certain things. That's what happened in this test. We never should have been able to dump that NTDS file without triggering something. They did get an alert, and they contacted us 15 minutes after the fact. And, hey, we caught this. I'm like, yeah, we're already cracking your password, sorry. Or alerts are going to unmonitored mailboxes, because Carl back here left 3 months ago and nobody rerouted his email. So if you're doing testing, do your clients a solid and test this with them. Have them test it like any other piece of infrastructure. And if you're the one approving test, make sure your provider is including this as well. So to wrap up, ransomware, phishing, infostealers, those are still the top concerns. When it comes to protection, the basics matter. You have got to lock down the basics. It doesn't matter all the money that gets spent on fancy toys and silver bullets. If you don't have the basics locked down, your organization is still at risk. And then finally, test those controls before bad people do, which I know sounds self-serving given what I do for a living, but you do not want your final exam to be a live attack. And that's what I got. So let's go eat. Oh, no.
Sorry for the lack of heads up.
All right, let me think. Oh, yeah, that's a lot of pressure. All right, what percentage of attacks do we know of that contain infostealers as a component? 54. Ooh, right out the gate. And, oh, that's fancy. I got to go back through my own presentation and find a good one.
What percentage of market share is Chile?
Yeah, there we go. Who's the current leader of ransomware groups? Oh man, I don't even know who said that one first.
You do a different one.
Yeah, that's
No leading the witness.
dark websites. What do they end in? The URLs. There we go. All right, thank you, everyone.